Hello, and in this video, you'll learn to create this awesome Star Wars themed portfolio website, which uses Three.js, React, and Vite. Has animations for 3D models, has camera movement. Also, we have two more pages, which you can access by scrolling, which initializes camera movement. We can go to my projects page, and in here we'll see the Star Destroyer with some of the projects we have created. And without further ado, let's begin. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is go to our desktop and create a new folder, which we'll call space-website, and drag it into our Visual Studio Code. Next, we can go to View and Terminal and run npm create Vite at latest. Next, we can expand this window and in here write /, meaning we'll create the project in this folder. We'll choose Classic React, and we won't really need TypeScript here, so we'll choose Vanilla JavaScript. And we can run npm install to install all the dependencies. Now, as many of you know, I usually use Next.js for my big projects, but in this case we're using Vite. Now, you're definitely free to use Next.js or any other framework, but in this case I'm using Vite because Next.js really doesn't have much to offer when working with Three.js, as most of the code will be client-side anyways. So we can continue by making all necessary installations for the libraries. So we can say npm install 3 at react-3/dray at react-3/fiber react-router-dom and react-spring. This could take about a minute, and once that's done, let's also add Tailwind CSS for all the styling. For this, we can go to our browser, go to this link, and follow the commands. First of all, let's install Tailwind CSS. This should only take a few seconds, as this isn't a big library. Let's straight away copy this command to initialize it and use it here. Next, let's copy all of this, and once Tailwind config.js is created, paste it in here. Also, we can copy this and paste it into our index.css in our source folder, and actually remove all the styles that are here currently. While we're still in the terminal, let's run npm run dev to run the server and continue. We can delete app.css completely, we won't be using it. And we can go to app.jsx and remove everything inside of the return statement. Absolutely everything. And in here we can have a main, which can say, hello there. We can give this main a class name of text-red-500 to test that everything works. Also, we can remove useState and all of these imports. So now let's control click. And as you can see, we have a completely blank screen with a red hello there, which means Tailwind CSS and Vite are working. Also, we should set up the router, even though we won't be using it just yet. So we can remove all of this and say router. And go up here and import it. So we can say import browser router as router. Next, we can import route and routes. Next we can do is in here add all of the routes and add the first route itself. So we can say route, which will have a path of /, meaning the page the person enters when he first enters the website, and it must have an element. So we can say element equals home, which will be a component. To create this component, we can go into source and create a new folder called pages, which will first of all have home.jsx, and here we can run refc. Next, we can have an about.jsx and also run refc. Next, a projects.jsx, and as always, refc. And finally, a contact.jsx. and as always, REFC. By the way, if you don't know how to create this RFC or it doesn't work for you, you can go to extensions and install this extension, which will allow you to use all the React snippets. Next, we can go back to the app, select this, press Ctrl Space, and import it from Pages. We can copy this 3 more times and change all the elements. So here we can have About, here we can have Projects, and finally we can have Contact. And we can change all the paths as well. So we can have About, so when the person goes to /about, he will see the About element. Next in here we can have Projects, and finally Contact. Now if we go back into our app, as you can see, instead of seeing the text we had before, we see the home text, which comes from the home component. If we go to /about, we will see About. Now let's create the home page. Inside of this home page, we can actually remove this div and turn it into a section. We can give the section a class name of w-full, h-screen, relative, bg-black, and overflow-hidden. Inside of the section, we can add a canvas, which will come from React-3/Fiber. This canvas will first of all have a class name, which will be w-full, h-screen, bg-transparent. Also will have a camera. So basically the person will be looking at all of these 3D objects through a camera. And we can set its boundaries. So a near of 0.1 and a far of 1000. Inside this canvas, we can have a suspense, which will come from React. Now, when a person goes onto our website, he will not see all the 3D models initially because they'll be loading. It usually takes a few seconds. And in this time, we'll need to have a loader to show the person that something is actually happening. So in here we can say fallback equals loader, which will be a component that we'll create ourselves right now. For this, we can go into our source folder and create a new folder called components. We won't have many. And in here we can create this loader.jsx. And as always, run refc. And let's import it into our home straight away. So as before, select this, Ctrl Space, and import it from components. So we can go into our loader and remove all of this and instead replace it with HTML, which will come from React-3/Dre. Inside of here we can add a div, and this div will have a class name, which will be flex, justify-center, and items-center. In here we can have another div, which will also have a class name. This div will be w-20, h-20, border-2, border-opacity, -20, dash instead of equals. Next we can have a border-blue-500, a border-1, or rather border-t-blue-500, and rounded-full, and animate-spin. We can also make this a self-closing div, as we won't have anything inside of it. And now we can finally move on to the most interesting part of our project, and that is adding the 3D models. Now we can go into your browser and into Sketchfab. I already have this 3D model of a Death Star opened. I'll have a link to it in the description down below. Also, you can find models over here. Now let's begin downloading and implementing it. For this, we can scroll down and click Download 3D Model and choose GLB. We'll have multiple options and we'll choose the best texture size. And this shouldn't take long, maybe a minute. Once that's done, we can go to a website to convert this model into a React component that we can use. So we can open a new tab and go to this website. Next, we can go to our Downloads folder. Here is our model, and let's drag and drop it into the website. It shouldn't take long, only a few seconds, and we should have the code available. As you can see, here's the code, and it's actually not long. And here is our 3D model. So what we can do now is go back to our Visual Studio Code, go to source, create a new folder called models, and create a death_.jsx and paste all of this into it. So we can go over here, click exports, copy to clipboard, and paste everything here. Now we need to make some changes to this file. First of all, as you can see, it shows a bunch of errors, and this isn't actually our fault. We can hover over here, press quick fix, and we can say disable React no unknown property for this entire file. This is simply ESLint not knowing how to handle Three.js, and as you can see, all the errors are suddenly gone. Next, we can make this a proper export, so let's remove all of this and say const death star equals, make this an arrow function, remove this preload, we don't need it, and say export default death star. Next, we'll still need the models themselves in this component and in the app itself. So for this, we can go to assets, create a new folder called 3D. And this folder will have all of the GLB assets. So you can find all the models in the description down below. I will already paste them in here. Now let's actually add the star to this file. As you can see here, we have a path, which is obviously wrong. So we can say import, not all caps. So import death star scene from /assets/3d/deathstar.glb and replace this with the scene. And now I believe we're done with this file. So we can now move back to the home.jsx file. In here, we'll first of all need to add all the size and position. So we can say const adjust star for screen size equals, so normal arrow function, and say let screen scale and screen position. Under here we can say screen scale equals an array of 0.6, 0.6, and 0.6. Under here we can say screen position equals 0, 6.5, or rather minus 6.5. And in here say minus 43.4. Under here we can say const star scale and star position equals adjust star for screen size. And now we'll actually be able to add the death star to the scene, although we won't be able to see it. Let me show you. So we can say death star, which will import from the models, and add several attributes over here. So first of all, we can say position equals star position, scale equals star scale, and we can say rotation equals 0, 0, and 0, and surround this with these kind of brackets. And I believe this part is actually done. Now we only need to add the lights to be able to see the Death Star itself. Now I did make a small mistake in that I didn't return screen scale and screen position from the function, meaning I am unable to access it here. So let's make this not capital and not capital over here as well, and say return screen scale and screen position. And now everything here is right. However, if we check the browser, we get this, an error. And it's not an error with our code. It's simply that Vite isn't accustomed to using GLB files. So we can go back to our Visual Studio Code, go to vite.config.js, and add this line under the plugins. This will fix everything. So let's go back to our browser, reload, and let's see what we get. If I'm correct, we should get a Death Star model that is barely visible, because we don't have any lighting. As you can see, we currently get this loading state that we created. And soon enough, we should get the model itself. And yes, here it is, filling up a big portion of the screen, but not fully visible because we didn't add any light around it. Now, we can go inside the suspense and above the Death Star and add lighting. First of all, direction light, which, as you might have guessed, points light in a single direction. So we can say position, an array of 1, 1, and 1. And we can say intensity of 2. And what are these errors? Simply ESLint errors, so nothing to worry about. We can actually disable this for the entire file. And let's look at what this looks like. As you can see, we have some light pointing from this direction onto the Death Star, and it's actually properly visible now. So now we can continue and add all of the other 3D models. So we can go to a browser and do this exact same thing. So we can drag and drop the model over here. I will provide all of them in the description down below. Wait for everything to load. As you can see, it's quick this time. See that the model is correct, and yes, it is in fact correct. Click Exports, copy to clipboard, go back to our Visual Studio Code, go to Models, create a new file called destroyer.jsx, and paste it here. Once again, let's get rid of all these errors by clicking Quick Fix and disable all this for the entire file, and do the exact same process as with Death Star. So we can say import destroyer scene from /assets/ it's lagging for me for some reason /3d/destroyer, replace with destroyer scene. Also, what we'll need to do is remove this preload at the bottom. We do not need it. We can say export default destroyer, and we should make it with a capital letter. And at the same time, name the function destroyer. So we can say const destroyer equals, and make this into an arrow function. Now let's see if it looks like the Death Star in here. And essentially, yeah. So let's add it to the file. So let's go back to home.jsx and in here repeat the process as with Death Star. First of all, let's copy this function, paste it over here, and change the star to destroyer. Also, let's replace the values. This will be much smaller, so 0.003, 003, and once again 003. Also, the position will be different. It will be 4, -4, and -6. Next, let's copy this. I can just do that like this, Alt-Shift and arrow down, and change the star to destroyer. And over here, once again, change the star to destroyer. And now we can go under here, copy this, paste it under here, change star position to destroyer position, scale to destroyer scale, and change the rotation. This will be 13, 20.5, and finally -0.3. Next, we can actually change this to destroyer. And we should be done with the destroyer. Actually, no, we are not. One final thing is I forgot to change the star to destroyer for the second function. And now we are actually done with this part. So let's go to terminal, control click into our localhost, and see if everything worked correctly. Now we have the loading state, and in a few seconds we should see the models. And as you can see, here we have the destroyer. Much smaller than the Death Star, exactly as intended. So, let's continue. I also added all of the other 3D models behind the scenes, as the process for them is exactly the same. So let's add all of them into Home. So let's copy this 3 more times. So 1, 2, and 3. Let's change this to tie. This to, let's select this properly and change this to space. And finally change this to Xwing. Let's begin changing the scale and position for the tie. The scale will be 0.01, 0.01, and 0.1. Next, the position will be 3.3, -4, and 4.8. Next, space. Space is going to be massive, so the scale is going to be 70, as everything is going to be inside of space. The 3D model itself is actually a massive sphere. And let's do it like this. And for the position, it's going to be 0, 0, and -4. Now let's move on to the Xwing. The scale is going to be 0.2 on all 3 fronts. And the position is going to be -2.8, 0.6, and finally 0.4. Now let's copy all of these. Let's add 3 more, change this to tie, change this to space, and change this to adjust Xwing. Also, let's change all of these, so tie and tie. Next, we're going to have space, and over here space as well. And finally, the Xwing. So Xwing and Xwing. So now let's add all these models to the return statement. So we can go under the Death Star and copy it over here and change this to space. Now from star we can change it to space, position, and remove this position, just from star scale to space scale, and the rotation will also be 0, 0, and 0. For the destroyer, we can copy this and change this to tie. Once again, let's change the position and scale. So tie scale and tie scale over here and tie position over here. And there's also going to be a little bit of rotation. So we can say 0.2, -0.3, and 0.2. And finally, we can copy this once again and add everything for the Xwing. So we can say Xwing, change the position to Xwing position, the scale to Xwing scale, and the rotation to 0.2, or rather in this case 0, 3, and 0. Now for some reason it isn't finding space, tie, and Xwing automatically, so I'm just going to make the imports manually. So let's say tie, space, and Xwing, and here once again tie, space, and Xwing. So now let's look at our progress. As you can see, here we have it, and this looks awesome. The only 2 things we need to do with the models for now are add the animation for the Xwing and change the camera position, both of which aren't difficult. So let's go back to our Visual Studio Code, go to our canvas, and add a position to this camera. And the position will be 0, -2, and 3.3. If we save this, it will do an automatic reload. And as you can see, this is how it looks. Now let's add the animation for the Xwing. As you might have guessed, we won't be creating the animation ourselves. It's already ingrained into the model. All we need to do is find it and implement it. So for this, we can go to xwing.jsx. And by the way, this file is massive, almost 5,000 lines long. And we have this actions variable, which is actually an object. So let's first of all see it. We can say use effect, which will import from React, and say console.log, and this will be actions. And let's not forget to add these square brackets at the end. So now let's look at our inspect element into our console. As you can see, we get this object with the name of takeoff. Takeoff is precisely the name of our animation. So we can go back and remove this console.log. So in here we can say if actions and actions.takeoff. This simply check that the action does in fact exist and has loaded in. In here we can say actions.takeoff.play, and under it say actions.takeoff.loop equals true. And believe it or not, we're actually done with the animation. So now let's check how this looks in the website. So here we have our Xwing, and in a few seconds the animation should once again start. And yeah, here it is, the animation has begun. There's also animation on the cockpit, but we can't see it under this angle. And this animation will loop over and over again. Now, let's move on to the next part, and that is one of the most interesting parts, adding the camera movement. For this, we can go back into Visual Studio Code, go to Components, and create a new file called camera controller.jsx and run refc. This component will have a prop, which is going to be set current section. For this component, we'll actually need to install another library, which is called Tween, which will be used for the camera movement. So we can go to View and Terminal and add another terminal over here. So we can say npm install at tween.js/tween.js. And in a few seconds, this should be all installed. And yes, as you can see, only took 3 seconds. Now we can actually delete this extra terminal and close it. By the way, I made a mistake by naming camera controller, not camera controller. So let's quickly delete this file. Create a new one called camera controller this time, .jsx, run refc, and make some imports. So we can say import everything as tween from at tween.js/tween.js and import everything as 3 from 3. And now we can finally go into the camera controller. So we can say use state snippet and say target position and set target position. And by default, it's going to be new 3.vector3 and call it. Under here, we can also say const curly brackets camera, and this will be use 3, which will come from react-3/fiber. And let's also call it. Under here, we'll have the forward and backward position. So basically, positions in between which our camera will be moving. So we can say const forward position equals new 3.vector3, and we can enter the x, y, and z axis. So 3.3, -4, and -4.63. And under here, const backward position, which is going to equal to new 3.vector3, 0, -2, and 5.3. Under these values, we can have a use effect, which will import from React. This use effect will make all the camera movement. First of all, this use effect will depend on a forward position and backward position. Inside of it, we'll have a direction, essentially in which direction the camera will be moving. So we can say const direction equals new 3 dot vector 3 and say dot subvectors forward position and backward position, and add another method called dot normalize. Under here we can have a new handle scroll function, which will have an event for the props. It'll be a normal arrow function. Now some things here might seem confusing, but most of the confusing things are made to calculate in which part of the screen, or rather in which part of our movement between forward position and backward position we currently are in. So don't worry about those things. So we can say const scroll amount equals e dot delta y times 0.03. Next, const move amount equals direction dot clone dot multiply scalar scroll amount. Next, const new target position equals target position dot clone dot add move amount. Next, we can calculate the distance traveled. So we can say const total distance equals forward position dot distance to backward position. Next, const target distance equals new target position dot distance to no direction distance to backward position. And finally, const lerp factor equals 3 dot math utils dot clamp, and here we can say target distance divided by total distance, and 1, or rather 0 and 1. Now we can divide distance into two separate sections. The section which we'll see when we first go to the website, and the section which we'll see once the camera moves. But for that, I forgot one thing. Once I remade this component, I forgot to add the props. So we can say set current section. And we can go under here and say if lerp factor is less than 2/3, so basically less than 2/3 distance traveled. In that case, set current section to 1. Else, if lerp factor is more than 2/3, in that case, we'll first need a time delay. So we can say set timeout. And in here we can say set current section to 2. And this will happen after 1500 milliseconds, or 1.5 seconds. Now we can go outside the if statement and say const clamped target position equals new 3 dot vector 3 dot lerp vectors, and say backward position, forward position, and finally the lerp factor. And after all this, we can finally make the movement. So we can say new tween dot tween camera dot position dot to clamped target position, and at a speed of 2000, and dot start. And under here we can say set target position to clamped target position, and finally go outside of this function. And here we can say window dot add event listener. It's going to listen to the wheel, and it's going to perform a handle scroll. Next we can say return, and let's spell this correctly, and it's going to return window dot remove event listener of wheel, and once again it's going to perform the handle scroll. And now we can go actually outside of this use effect and say use frame and tween dot update. and it's going to return simply null. And I believe we're fully done with this component. Now let's implement this in the home.jsx file. First of all, we can go up to the top and create a new use state. So we can say use state, snippet, and current section, and make this capital. By default, it's going to equal to 1. Next, we can go inside of the suspense and add the camera controller and pass in the props. There's only going to be one prop of set current section, which is going to equal to set current section. And if there are no bugs, we are done. And yes, we do actually have a small bug. We forgot to import use state in both of the files. So we can go over here, control space, enter use state, and do the same thing in the camera controller. And now we should truly be done. And now let's see how this looks in the actual website. Here we are, and let's scroll. This will make this awesome camera movement to the TIE fighter. However, this does seem off because the camera is too close. So we can go to the camera controller and change this to -4.07. And let's change this to from 5 to 4.2. So let's scroll back. And this looks better. And now we can also scroll back to the original position. And here we are. So we can freely scroll forward and backward, just as these two positions intend. Now, let's go to the easier part of the website, and that is adding all of the other pages and adding all of the cards. So let's create the first component, and that will be the show section. So we can create a new file, say show section.jsx, and run refce. This component will accept multiple parameters of target, position, and set is contact. We'll need to import tween for this component, so we can say import everything as tween from at Three.js/tween.js. And in here say const camera equals use 3. And under here, we can create a function for camera movement. So we can say const handle click equals, so basic arrow function. And in here, say new tween camera position to target position and in time span of 1500. And also start. Next, under here, we can say set timeout, and set is contact to true after 800 milliseconds. Now we can continue to the return statement. We can remove this div and add an HTML, which will come from React-3/J. This will allow us to use JSX syntax inside of our canvas. So in here we can create a normal div and style it. We can say class name absolute minus -top -56 left -340 pixels bg -opacity -50 w -380 pixels bg -gray -800 text -white rounded shadow -lg and z-10. Under here we can have an h2 and also style it. So we can give it a class name of text-3xl font-semi-bold text-transparent bg-clip-text. So we're essentially giving this text the color of a gradient. So we can say bg-gradient-2-r from -cyan-500 and to -blue-800 and a margin bottom of 2. And the text will be turning imagination into reality. Under this h2, we can have a p tag, which will say, I am a React front end developer who specializes in Next.js and Three.js. And it will have a class name of text-gray-300 and a margin bottom of 4. And under here we can have a div, which will have a class name of flex and flex-row. This will hold the buttons. So we can have the first button, which will say scroll to continue. This is technically not a button, but it will look like one. So we'll mark it as a button. And then we can say class name, border dash blue dash 500, animate dash pulse, text dash white, font dash bold, padding Y of 2, padding X of 4, and rounded dash XL. Next, we can actually give this div a gap of 5 and add the next button. So we can say button, which will say contact me, and this button will have a class name. This class name will be very similar, so we can copy this part and here say bg-blue-500 hover bg-blue-700. And this button will also have an onClick, so we can say onClick handle click. And I believe we are done with this component. Now we can move on and create a very similar section. We can actually copy all of this, go into home, go right over here above this canvas and say if the current section equals to 2, in that case we will have all of this, but with a different text. So let's first of all remove this handle click, change this to learn more about me, change this text, and let's make the apostrophes correct with the correct syntax. Next, let's change this to about me, and this to my projects. Let's change this to link, and this to link as well, which will come from react-router-dom. This will have a 2 of projects, and this will have a 2 of about. Next, we can change some of the styles, so we can say top-20 over here, and right-20. Next, we can change the styles for the buttons. Let's copy this and add it over here with no pulsation whatsoever. And I believe we are done with this part. Actually, no, we need to add a slash over here and a slash over here, and we can move on. We can go inside the suspense and add the show section, which will have 2 parameters. First parameter is going to be the target position, and that is going to be 0, 0, and -9. Next, we'll need the set is contact, which we'll create right now. You can go above here and say use state snippet is contact and set is contact, and by default it's going to be false. And so we can say that set is contact is going to equal to set is contact. We'll also need to pass the set is contact to the camera controller. So we can go over here and say set is contact equals set is contact. Go to the camera controller, set is contact, and at the end of handle scroll say set is contact to false. So as you can see over here, we're setting it to true, and over here once we scroll away, we set it to false. Also, let's go back to home and change one thing. Over here, we need to add, I don't know what happened here, and end over here to make everything work. And now let's look at the result. Let's reload this. Now let's look at what we got and fix all the issues. First of all, we don't have any padding and it's not rounded enough. So we can go to the show section, say padding -4, and make it rounded -XL. And do the same thing in the home. So over here, we can say padding -4 and rounded, wherever that is, -XL. Now this looks better. Now if we scroll, we get this, which does look correct. Now let's go back. If we click on this button, nothing happens. And I think I know why. First of all, we'll need to import everything as 3 from 3 into home. Next, we need to go over here and change this from this kind of vector to new 3 dot vector 3 0 0 minus 9. Next, we can go to show section and make the start a function. And now if we click contact me, it moves us over here, which is exactly what we want. And now I believe we're actually done with these two cards. Now let's move on to the contact section. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, please consider liking and subscribing. Thank you. Now, I initially planned contact to be a separate page, but I decided to make a component on the front page. So for this, we can go to pages and move contact into components. Next, we can go to app.jsx and completely remove this contact path and remove the import of contact into app.jsx. Now let's go into contact.jsx and start working. First of all, we can remove this text and style the wrapper div. We can have a class name of absolute inset-0 w-full flex justify-center items-center, and that's it. Inside of here, we can have another div. This div will have a class name which will be very similar to the show section, and the overall style will also be very similar. So bg-opacity-50 w-380 pixels, padding-4, bg-gray-800, text-white, rounded, shadow-lg, and a z of 10. Let's actually change this to 380 instead of 480. Go to show section, copy these two tags, paste them over here, change this to contact me, and change this to please fill out the form below to get in touch with me. Under the speed tag, we can have the form itself, which can have a class name of flex, flex-call, and gap-5. First of all, we'll have an input, which will have a type of text, and a placeholder of your name. It should also have a class name of border-blue-500, text-white, font-bold, padding Y-2, padding X-4, and rounded-XL. Now let's copy this 2 more times, 1, 2. Make this type of email your email, and change this to type of text and make this your message and make this capital. Also under here we can have a button which will be the submit button, so we can say submit and it will be of a type submit, and it will have a class name of bg-blue-500 hover animate-pulse hover bg-blue-700 text-weight font-bold heading y-2 heading x of 4 and rounded-xl. Now let's add it to the home, so we can go back to home, go above the current section equals to, and say is contact. In that case, we can return the contact. Now let's see how this looks in the project itself. So here we have the front page, and let's click contact me. This moves us over here and shows us this contact form. Let's change it slightly. We can go back here, go to contact, and say margin top -16 over here, rounded -LG over here, next text -center over here, and once again text -center. And if we go back, actually let's make this 600 as well, and this does look much better. And we have this contact form which looks great, and we even have the pulsing effect when we hover over the submit button. And I believe we're now fully done with the front page of this app. Let's continue by creating the other pages. First we can go to project.jsx, and it'll be very similar to home in some ways. So we can go back to home, copy this wrapper section, and paste it over here. And close it properly. Next, we can go back to home, copy this canvas and suspense, and also paste it over here. Close the canvas, wrap everything in the canvas, import the canvas itself, import the suspense, and import the loader. Now let's make everything around the return statement. So we can go over here and go back to home, find space, and copy it. So just space for screen size will be exactly the same. And then copy the destroyer as well. But this will be slightly different. Also, let's copy and paste the space and destroyer exports. And here we go. So space will be exactly the same, but destroyer will have a different position and rotation. So first of all, the scale will be 0.01, not 0.003, as the destroyer will be the main image or model of this page, and the position will be 4, -1, and -6. Next we can go into the suspense, go back to home, copy the space first of all, import space from models, copy the destroyer, paste it over here and import it, and change the rotation. The rotation will be 13, 9.4, and -0.3. Next thing we can do is create the grid which holds the images. So we can create a div inside the section about outside of the canvas and say class name absolute top -36 left -20 grid calls -2 gap -5 a z of 10 and a max -w 40%. I also added all of the images to the assets folder behind the scenes to save some time, and also here are the imports. So in here we can say image alt will be website photo, and the source will be next website. Next we can copy this 3 more times, so we can have the image of star, the image of space website, and the final image of web portfolio. We can change the alts later. And now let's see how this looks in the actual website. So here we have the website, and let's scroll to get to this part, and let's click my projects. And here we have it, but we don't have any lighting. So we can go back to home, copy the direction light, and paste it in suspense. And also let's change it from -1 to 1. And now this is how the final page looks. And in my opinion, this does look awesome. Now let's move on to the About Me page. I believe the fastest way to do it is simply to copy everything in projects and paste it into About. Next we can go to Home, copy adjust Xwing for screen size, and go to About and replace the destroyer with it. Next, we can copy this line and once again replace the destroyer, and copy the Xwing itself, and once again replace the destroyer. Also, we will have different size, position, and rotation. So first of all, the scale will be 0.32, so bigger than before, but not too much bigger, not as big as the destroyer. Next, the screen position will be 0, 0.4, and 0.4. Next, we can look at the rotation, which will be 0.75, 0, and 0. And in here we can paste some text like here. And replace this apostrophe with the correct syntax. I didn't bother rewriting this text as it is exactly the same as we did before, with simply some margin on top over here. And if there are no bugs, we're fully done with the website. Actually, we do need to change two things. First of all, over here make a Z of 50, and also make this from 0.75 to 1. And so, here we are, the finished website. We have this front page with this animated Xwing, some small information about ourselves, and of course the Death Star. We can click Contact Me to access the contact form. We can also scroll either way, in this case to access the Star Destroyer and TIE Fighter, some more information about the user, and we can click the About Me page, which will show us this Xwing and some more information about the user. Quite a simple page, but quite a good looking one. And of course we still have the animation for the Xwing here as well. Now we can also go back, wait a few seconds for everything to reload, to be able to access the My Projects page. This is taking longer than usual, but this is because we are in our local environment. If we deploy this website, it will not lag as much. And so we can click on the My Projects page, and here we are, an awesome page of a Star Destroyer and some project that we created previously. By the way, if you're new to the channel, you can find and create all these projects on my YouTube channel as well. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Thank you.